good in bad weather, but it's not really that bad weather today. But anybody go to the 8 o'clock or the 8:30 service? All right. How was it? Is it? Yeah. Is it? Yeah. We have Kevin's preaching today, right?
Yes.
He's preaching both.
He's preaching, or is preaching.
He's a big boy now. The 8:30 and the 11. So, well, all right. I think last week, or maybe the week before, we had some of the high school students come do the announcement for the youth spaghetti auction. I won't be quite as charming, but I'll try to get the information across. So March 4th is Sunday, March 4th is when we'll be having the annual Youth Choir Spaghetti Luncheon and Silent Auction. So that's 2 weeks away. That's to raise money for their upcoming choir tour to Oregon, where they will get to spend some time with one of our former residents, Rick Carlson, up in the Portland area. So more details about that, but I just thought I'd do a little teaser. Later this week, on Wednesday, there will be some new classes in the evening. One related to the Lenten book study that we're doing. The book is 40 Days with the Holy Spirit by Jack Levinson of SMU. And if you want to buy a book and be studying that, it's just basically daily devotional readings. So I guess there's 40 readings for the 40 days of Lent. You can buy that in the church office for $5. And then I don't know who will be leading the class on Wednesday nights, but if you want to have a group to discuss what you've been reading with, that will be available Wednesday nights.
Every Wednesday? Every Wednesday?
For the next 3 Wednesdays. Yeah. So the 21st, February 21st through March 7th.
What is that, like community hall?
Right, roll at 6 o'clock, right after we finish the supper time at the community hall. People break up and go to different classes. This is one. There's also going to be a reprisal of the strengths class, Living Your God-Given Strengths class. Is this the Strengths Finders? Is that what that's what?
If you haven't done it,
I've both done it.
highly recommend it. It's great if you haven't done it.
It's good to do. It's also a good way just to meet different people. So that was my big takeaway out of it. I mean, you learn about yourself, obviously, too, but you get to learn about other people, and usually there's good discussion, and it's a good experience. So that will also be going on for Wednesday nights. I think that's a 6-week or 7-week program.
Yeah, it's a little longer. Yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay.
No, I mean 6 or 7 weeks.
Through April 4th. Through April 4th is what it said.
It's good.
All right. And then finally, Aaron Coyle Carr's wife, Leanna, will be teaching a class on, well, it's called Practicing Prayer with Creation. And I guess it's the idea of how do you focus on man's role with creation, man's role with nature, with respect to your prayer life. So she'll be doing that during the Lenten season as well, so for the next 3 Wednesdays. That's also at 6 o'clock after we have supper in Community Hall. And that's all I was going to say. Not leaving anything out?
If somebody didn't see a Facebook post by Jacob Copper's wife,
Oh, yes.
she is pregnant.
Yes.
She also saw what makes it so interesting is that 2 weeks ago.
The sermon, no, last week.
Last week.
Yeah.
And she's actually 21 weeks, so he knew at the time that she was pregnant, but she has miscarried and had so many problems, they didn't want to come public with it, I guess, until then. But yes, so that is a big, big blessing.
You can put that on the prayer list.
Yeah.
Would you go back to that spaghetti thing for the kids going off, when that is and
March 4th, and it's just lunch right after the 11 o'clock service, and it's just down in Community Hall. Usually lasts, I don't know, about 1:30. How long does that usually last?
Something like that. But and there's things. If you have anything to donate, there are sheets there, Henry, at the front.
Oh yes,
to your left there, yeah.
And it's for the youth, the teenagers, whatever?
Yeah, for the choir trip. For the choir trip.
Go to-
7 through 12
Portland this
grades.
year.
What am I looking for?
Yeah,
Oh,
Jeff Brummel.
Boy, that's a good place to go.
That's if you want to donate.
This is just they want to donate
He's our organizer.
money.
There's a
No, if you have an item that you want to enter
Well,
the
yeah, if you
auction.
want to donate anything to be
Oh,
auctioned
yeah,
off,
right, they're gonna be.
let's pass this around. If anybody wants to do that. And then you can just, if you want to fill that out and then give it to Dennis or me. So, that's it. Oh, I guess in at the room, is that coming up soon?
That's just happened.
Oh, it just happened, I missed
This
it.
weekend.
But then there'll be another
There's
one.
another one next month, and I'm sure there are volunteers needed. I don't know who's leading that,
Okay.
because
Melissa. Melissa Atkinson.
they're
yeah.
out, they're gonna be out, so
Oh,
they're out of town. There'll be somebody else leading.
That's it.
okay. If I get an email,
This
then
is, that's something you put up there for
Okay, so, we have a new teacher today, Brad Russell.
Fresh meat.
He came highly recommended by Mark Wingfield, so we quickly recruited him.
There's George.
Brad's a
There's all the-
relatively new member. When did you join him?
We joined about 6 months ago. I've been
Okay.
working here about a little over a year.
Okay.
With George.
Dennis has prepared a script for me to read for Dennis, for Brad's introduction.
And.
Brad and his wife, Kendall Russell, have been married 25 years. Their oldest daughter, Madison, is a recent Baylor graduate working in nonprofit marketing in Austin. Their son, Aaron, is a junior biology major at University of North Texas. And their youngest daughter, Alyssa, is a freshman biology major at Holland College. Where is, Holland County?
Yeah.
Okay. Preparing to transfer to a major university in the fall. Brad is a research director for Parks Associates, specializing in marketing and business strategy for consumer Internet of Things products. Previously, Brad served as an ordained minister in a variety of ministry capacities for 25 years, including senior pastor, church planter, theological education administrator, and publishing editor. He holds a master's in divinity with biblical languages from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and a doctorate in ministry from Austin Presbyterian Seminary. Kenda, his wife, is a licensed medical social worker, working as a healthcare case manager and social worker for multiple hospitals and home health agencies. Brad and Kenda joined Wilshire in the summer of 2017. So,
We have two connections to our class too. One of Brad's relatives probably introduced Robert's mother in China to Christ. Okay?
oh, that's right. That's what you
We're speculating here, but
Yes.
we just connected. I have a great uncle who was a missionary to China in the 1920s to 40s in northern China, and he rode horseback from village to village and started seminaries.
Wow.
And Robert said, I've heard of his name before, and our lives probably intersected.
Yep. And the second one is
that
that
is a small one.
the second one is that Brad is a friend of Clay Price, and Clay and Sandra Wallace work together at BGCT. So.
I've known Clay for years, love Clay. Yeah. And he's a UT grad, and I'm a UT grad, and there aren't that many of us in Baptist ministry life, so.
Well, welcome. We'll circulate the prayer request book and praise notification book while Brad's teaching. Anyway, welcome, Brad.
Super, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so my great pleasure to be with you this morning. Obviously, from my bio, you can tell that I can't figure out what to do when I grow up. So I'm still figuring that out, but I guess like Jacob, maybe, my life has had a lot of twists and turns in it. But I find that God has been kind of mysteriously sovereign over it all. And I find that tremendously reassuring, and I hope you do as well. So thanks to Dennis, thanks to Henry for recruiting me to teach a little bit here. I love to teach. I love these texts on Jacob this morning. In fact, the last couple of weeks I've been teaching on Jacob in the Epiphany class, where I spend most of my time. And so I've been thinking about these texts for a number of weeks, and one of the conclusions I've come to is that my perspectives on Jacob have evolved a good deal. Every time I come back to these texts, it seems like I see Jacob a little bit differently. And I'll kind of unpack what I mean by that as we look at this today. Also, thanks to Allison. I know last week Allison covered, kind of the introductory part of Jacob's story, and Allison's great, and so I appreciate that. I have not seen her video, so I may do a couple of things differently with Jacob than she did. I don't know, or maybe we're completely on the same page. We'll see. I put this kind of this title up here, and let me unpack this idea a little bit before we launch into the text. This is the name of my series for Epiphany, and it's Viva Jacob, God's Luchador. Now, does anyone know what a luchador is?
Fighter.
A fighter. Excellent. Right? So, if you know the popular movie Nacho Libre, all right, with Jack Black, and this will tell you a lot about who I am. It's kind of a juvenile comedy, but it has some really interesting themes underneath it. Nacho is an orphan living in a monastery in Mexico, and he is aspirational. He aspires to be a luchador, which luchador is the name of a wrestler in Mexico, in pro-Mexican wrestling. All right, and the sport is called lucha libre. And lucha in Spanish means fighter, struggler, wrestler. Okay, and lucha libre means freedom, right? So pro-Mexican wrestling is called freedom fighters, right? And the fighters are called luchadores, right? And so Nacho dreams of being a wrestler because he wants to be somebody, right? And in his culture, these wrestlers, they're somebody, they're important. But he ultimately only discovers his true power as a wrestler because he really stinks in the beginning. Yeah. When he discovers that if he fights for the orphans, he becomes strong. And he ultimately prevails. Well, I chose that kind of pop culture theme to lay on top of this ancient Hebrew story because the dominant theme for the Jacob narrative across what begins in chapter 25 of Genesis to, we'll go to chapter 35, but the story goes on, is that he is the contender. He is the wrestler. He is the struggler. He is the fighter. And this narrative theme is reinforced again and again and again throughout the course of Jacob's story. In fact, as a piece of literature, the story is very artfully written. So at the very beginning, in chapter 25, he is described as wrestling with his brother in the womb. You may recall. These two twin brothers are in the womb, and she is having, Rebecca, their mother, is having this, this at-risk pregnancy. And she complains to God, and God says, let me tell you what's going on inside of your very own body. There's an epic theological struggle going on inside your body. And these two twins aren't just two twins. These are actually two nations. These are two peoples, two ways of being in the world. And the irony God says to her is that, unlike what you would expect, that the younger would serve the older, in fact, I have already decreed that the older will serve the younger. So they start struggling. I'm going to come back to that very idea because it's foundational. And then when we get to his relationship struggles, right? He struggles with his brother Esau, as you've well studied. He wrestles with his father Isaac. When he goes to live with father-in-law Laban, his uncle and father-in-law, eventually, they marry cousins, if you didn't get that figured out, that he has relationship conflict with him. And even Rachel says at one point in Genesis 30 that I wrestle with my sister Leah. So this theme of wrestling, and then in today's text, ultimately his name is going to be changed, and it's predicated on the notion that he is a contender. You will now be Israel, the key verse says, for you have contended, you have wrestled, you've struggled, you have fought with God and prevailed. So this theme of being a luchador, a fighter, a wrestler, a struggler, it's like woven all throughout this story. So it's essential to understanding who Jacob is. Now, just a couple of observations I want to make before we launch to the text very quickly. So I already said Jacob's essential nature is one of a contender, right? Secondly, the Jacob story is all about the covenant blessing of God and how that blessing is going to be transmitted to the next generation. Whatever we think of Jacob and the decisions that he makes, the deception and the trickery and all of that stuff that you've been talking about, it has to be understood in light of God's providential plan, right, to establish a covenant people and to protect that people and to use that people as a blessing to the world. And this is really important because if we lose sight of the blessing and the promise and what God has decreed will happen, we can reduce all of this interpretation into kind of what I call psychologizing the text. We can get obsessed with Jacob's internal psychology and his manipulations and his weird relationship with his mom and all this dysfunctional stuff, which is all very real and out there, but we have to understand all of that within this overarching plan of God to move the story forward. And that part of that's what's led me to some kind of different understanding about Jacob. The other thing is the inadequacy of what we call primogeniture. All right, and I don't know if Allison touched on this, but that 50-cent word, primogeniture, is the cultural tradition that the firstborn would inherit and be the leader of the family, right? Primogeniture. And so the cultural assumption of the text is that this is the way things are done, that the firstborn has an entitlement to this. And what God does at the very beginning of the story is says, it will not be so in this family. So God challenges the very cultural notion of primogeniture, and he turns it upside down, which says a lot about how God works. God is not bound by cultural rules. And there are cultural situations where God says, no, this calls for innovation. This calls for an alternative way of being in the world. We don't just follow business as usual. Something fresh has to happen here in order for my plan to be revealed. And this is really critical. And a part of that is that Esau was unworthy to be the carrier of the blessing. And I won't go into details because you've studied that text already. But Esau proves that he's not worthy to be the leader. He's too short-sighted. He's too driven by his gut instincts. He's not a serious man. He doesn't treat sacred things sacredly. And so because he's not worthy, Jacob must lead. So again, whatever we think about the deception, I don't believe ultimately Jacob is selfish.
It's like you're reading a different passage from the one I'm reading. Seriously.
Good.
I have read this like 3 or 4 times, and I'm struggling with everything you said. I can go, I see.
Yeah.
But I wanted to go back and find the text that supports that. I mean, because I see it completely the opposite.
And that's perfectly fine. It's totally fine.
Well, it's not, because
So
it makes me crazy.
good. That's exactly what the Bible should do. Yeah. I love what Walter Brueggemann says, and he's a theologian, and I lean very heavily on his work with these texts. And that is, the Jacob story is not a spiritual treatise of morality. It's not. These people are not moral role models. Okay? What it is it's a reflection on how God actually moves within real life. I find that helpful. So, let's dive into the text, keeping some of these things in mind, and let's get to what I call rematch or reconciliation. So, we're going to arrive at chapter 32 this morning. And at this point in the story, Jacob has been living off of Laban. He has the 2 wives. He's built up his herds. And the voice of God comes to him and says, it's time for you to go home. It's time for you to go back to the land I gave to your fathers. And it's time to deal with Esau. And so the big tension of the story come into this text is this going to be a rematch? Right? Are we going to go toe-to-toe again? Or is there going to be some kind of reconciliation? So I'm going to ask if someone would volunteer to read the first 12 verses of chapter 32.
Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called that place Mahanaim. Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob, I have lived with Laban as an alien and stayed until marriage. And I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male and female slaves. And I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in your sight." The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels into 2 companies, thinking, if Esau comes to the one company and destroys it, then the company that is left will escape. And Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, Return to your country and to your kindred, and I will do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I am afraid of him. He may come and kill us all, the mothers with the children. Yet you have said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted because of their number.
All right, very good, thank you. So let's break this down a little bit. The first couple of verses here describe his experience as he first comes toward the land of his fathers. He has what we call a theophany, right? He has this appearance of God in the form of angels. And he encamps there. And literally, Manahi means two camps. And it has kind of a military connotation. But he has this experience of angels. Now, I want to pause there and just think a little bit about all the times that Jacob experiences angels. All right? Because there's a lot of them. In fact, of all the early patriarchs, Jacob sees angels more than anyone. All right? So, do you remember, what's the first time Jacob saw angels?
He laid down,
Like that.
yeah, we laid a rock under his head.
Yeah, the first time he was at Bethel, and he's running from Esau's anger, and he lays down head on a rock, exactly right, important detail, and he sees the ladder, and the angels ascending and descending, and God basically affirms, right, that I am with you in this place, and you're on the right track, and the blessing is yours. Right? That was the... What's the next time he experiences angels? Do you recall? And you may not have looked at all these texts with Allison. I can't remember. Yeah, he's going to wrestle with him today. When he was living with Laban, he also has an angelic appearance, the one basically that says it's time for you to go home. Right?
Okay.
Here, he has an angel appearance now as he comes into the land. And again, every time he encounters these angels, it's interpreted in the scripture as affirmation of God that he's in the right place, that he's doing the right thing. And then later, at the end of today's text, we're going to see him actually wrestling with this, what's described as a man, but ultimately it's interpreted as he's wrestled with God. He's seen the face of God. So here's my question for you. What is the significance that Jacob experiences all these angelic encounters? What does that tell us about Jacob? What does it tell us about God's way of working in his life? How are we to interpret this? Why?
Maybe Jacob needed them more than anybody else.
Maybe Jacob needed these encounters more than anyone else. Okay.
God wanted to keep him on track, not let him get off track.
Okay, so it was kind of the direction, the guidance of God. All right.
I mean, in one of those encounters, did he demand the presence of God or something? He was like, you know.
There was one passage where he was saying, it was a conditional statement with God.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you will bless me.
yes,
Yeah.
I'll do what you say, but if you do this. And when I read that, I told Allison, I had a real problem with that passage. I mean, who barters with God? And that's what he was doing. And that passage of him laying down with the rock under his head, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I struggle with that passage because of all the deceit that had gone on before it. Obviously, God, when I read it, I went, God approves of that, and I struggled with that.
Sure.
But then you're basically laying out this, God has this plan, and I didn't see that. I mean, I could go back and read that 3 more times, and I probably wouldn't see that.
Well, the basis of it all is 25, where God has this decree, right? And you can't just throw that out the door. You can't say, oh, well, that's a nice idea, but Jacob's totally responsible for everything he's doing. Because that's the whole point of these stories, that God is the primary actor. And the humans, they make choices, but those choices serve the will of God, even when it's morally ambiguous.
Yeah, I think, if I understand, you're not saying that God approves of all of Jacob's actions. You're saying that God uses all of Jacob's actions.
I am.
Regardless of whether or not he would approve of them.
Exactly. Yeah, so and that's a really important point of distinction. So I'm not saying God authorizes deception as a modus operandi for getting his work done in the world. That would be a very slippery moral slope.
Yeah.
And I'm also not arguing that the end justifies the means as a moral decision-making model. However, what I am advocating is that the real way God works in our lives is he doesn't work just through righteous actions. God mysteriously works through our most stumbling, bumbling, foolish efforts in life. And then only in retrospect can we look back and say, oh my goodness, God was working through all of that. And even though I chose poorly or wrongly, somehow, mysteriously, it fulfilled the will of God in my life. I will push a little further, though. I will argue that there are certain extraordinary circumstances of life where we have to make the lesser of two evil choices, none of which are comfortable, and it can be the right thing to do, even if it's not morally pure. I just think of wartime, right? I mean, Anne Frank, hiding Anne Frank, right? This is a morally ambivalent choice, right? But it was the right thing to do. We could unpack a lot of examples. And so what I'm arguing for is that there was so much at stake in the inheritance and Esau's unworthiness to carry it, that the mother and the younger son conspired, yes, but they conspired because they were being faithful to God. They knew what was at stake, and they had the honesty to say, Esau cannot carry it. And so yes, we deceived, but we deceived for a higher purpose. Now, it's a slippery moral slope, all right? But nowhere in this story, I mean, every other aspect of this story, Jacob is an honorable man. In fact, he's more honorable than Laban, right? In fact, Laban cheats him. Jacob sees angels, back to my point, because Jacob has spiritual vision. Esau doesn't see angels. Not once does Esau see angels. Not once does an angel appear to Esau to affirm him, console him, do anything. So we have to make something out of God keeps showing up for Jacob in very special ways, but he doesn't show up for Esau.
So God didn't let Isaac in on this then, because Isaac's favorite was Esau, right? I mean, I all the time thought Rebecca is lost her mind because she's favoring one child over the other.
You think she's a manipulative mother?
Yeah, and what you're saying is
I say
Rebecca
no.
was more in tune with God and his plan than Isaac was.
I say Isaac should have recognized in his older son that he was not capable. And Isaac and Esau both conspired with the cultural tradition, the entitlement. Now, we just do what's always done. We just give it to the older son, and he was an uncritical thinker. He was not a perceptive father. He should have seen it. God told him in the very beginning they had, and they're not listening. Yeah, and so that my take is that Isaac should have known better.
Just as you used the word morals several times. Are morals something that come from God or something that come from man?
Yes.
Right.
So
So they're not the same. God, in other words, they're not always God's correct behavior. Not always. They're not exactly the same.
they're not the same.
We take what God tells us to do, and we as humans impose on that some other things that we say are morally right or wrong. Right?
Right. Yeah, no, I think there is what we call prescriptive morality, this is what God prescribes. He says, this is the standard of right and wrong. There is descriptive morality, that's what we actually do, right? And descriptive and prescriptive, there can be a huge gap between the two. So when I say moral, I was referring to the rightness or wrongness of deceiving, right? In principle, prescriptively, God is not a deceiver, right? God believes in truth, right? But the biblical characters, none of them is righteous.
Yeah.
None of them. Abraham, I mean, we could go back and all the moral choices Abraham made, right?
Yeah.
To pretend that his wife was his sister, and you know, and I mean, but God still uses these people. That's my only point.
This gives me hope.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's affirming that God uses people like us. So, to keep this moving, I know I'm stirring up a lot of stuff, so let's just kind of keep this moving on. So, I would suggest to you that that all of these angels appear to Jacob because Jacob actually has spiritual vision. Jacob has a very active religious subconscious. There are things going on. He's constantly thinking and reflecting and having these experiences. And all of them seem to be affirmation that Jacob is on that track. That God is with him, no matter what. Now, in that passage also, let's look at the next few verses in 3 to 6. This is where, Jacob starts to talk about, I'm going to send messengers to my brother Esau, and this is going to say to him, basically I live with Laban. So he begins to have an offering of deference, all right? So here's the question for you. What is the most, and this gets back to the conversation we're having, what is the most cynical view of what Jacob is doing here? And what is the most generous view of what Jacob's doing here? As he talks to think about sending a message to his brother, right? And he's acting all deferent, like, I'm humble before you, and I'm going to offer, I've been to Laban, and I've been successful, and the implication is I'm willing to share what I have with you as kind of an act of restitution. So there's this real humbling and deference. So how do we interpret this? What's the cynical view of what Jacob's up to?
He was trying to save his own hide.
He's scared to death.
Okay.
I mean, that's the way I read it.
Self-preservation.
Yeah.
He's scared to death, and he is scared. The text is very clear that he's afraid,
Yeah.
and he has every objective right to be afraid, right? Not only was Esau actually furious and said, "I'll kill you," as soon as Dad is gone, I'll kill you. And also, he does know that he deceived. I'm not saying that he's not self-aware. He knows that the natural reaction of deceiving your brother is he's going to want vengeance, right? So the cynical view is he's saving his hide. It's just the same old manipulator all over again, trying to manipulate his brother. What's the generous view? In other words, how would you interpret Jacob's actions if in fact he's not being manipulative?
I never contemplated that there was a generous view.
He's trying to make peace with his
That's why
brother.
I'm asking the question.
He's trying to make peace with his brother.
He's trying to make peace with his brother.
He's repentant of his behavior.
He is repentant. That there is something genuine going on here. And this is where it gets even more complicated. And that's why I always push for looking at these characters in 3 dimensions, not flat 2-dimensional characters. He doesn't really express any remorse for what he did. Nowhere in here does he say, I was wrong. But just because he doesn't have remorse, just because he may still believe that he was right in an extraordinary situation, he could very well still grieve that there is not unity in this family. He can still grieve it, even though he doesn't feel like he was wrong. And he could still desire it. And actually, on a higher level, if he is a man committed to what God wants, if he's actually more faithful than we think he is, he needs this reconciliation to happen for God's plan to move forward.
Well, that's what I was thinking. He's trying to make God's plan happen, knowing who he's dealing with, knowing his brother, knowing what his brother's like, and what he has to do in order for it to work. It's almost like the end justifies the means, although I don't like that saying.
But there may very well be a shrewdness at work here.
Yeah.
In fact, there is I'm going to argue this definitively. Jacob isn't a very shrewd man. And that in fact, God uses shrewdness. Now, shrewdness as a value cannot live alone. It has to be anchored to other values. And what did Jesus say about shrewdness in the New Testament about his disciples?
People of the world
Are wiser in their dealings than the people of light. And then he says what? To his disciples, I wish you to be, say it, you're there. As wise as serpents, and that word for wise is also shrewd, as serpents, and gentle
Gentle as lambs.
as doves. Right? So even Jesus holds these two values in tension, shrewdness. And shrewdness is understood as wisdom, contextual wisdom. Right? It's knowing what to do in that right situation, not just abstractly applying a rule, but reading the context and making the right choice with the end in mind.
It would certainly be easier for him to live his life if he didn't have to look over his shoulder the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. And the family will be stronger if they're all together. Put all the herds together, put all the resources together. And in the ancient world, the strength of the clan was survival. And that's why you had sons. That's why all of this. And so, again, I would just challenge you to think of these characters, either the cynical view right? Or suggest to you that maybe there is a more generous view that's not blind to the moral ambiguity of it all, but all of this is being used by a higher purpose. Okay, so let's just kind of press on. So verses 7 through 12, he talks about being greatly afraid, and then he launches into praying to God. And what does he say to God?
Spare one group if, right? He's asking for one to be spared, one of the two groups.
Right. Well, in the first part, he's praying to God. So he does spare the group. I'm going to separate them into two, which sounds like a really shrewd move, right? So if I lose half, at least I'll have half. Right? He's a planner, right? He's intentional. He's not making this up as he goes. And then he prays to God. And what does he say to God?
Deliver me from the hand of my brother.
Okay, so he's crying to God to save him, intervene on his behalf. All right, what else is he saying?
I'm not worthy.
I'm not worthy. There is the same humbling before God that he's doing with his brother, right? I'm not entitled for you to do this, right? So again, the cynical or the generous view. The cynical view is he trying to manipulate God? Can God even be manipulated? The generous view is maybe he's really humble. Maybe what he said to Esau is not just manipulation, because now in his own heart of hearts, with no one listening, except the storyteller, this is his inward state. This is the picture that we're supposed to get of his inward state, and that is he's humbling himself before God. And then what's the other thing that he does in the prayer?
Reminds God that it's his call to return.
Yeah, you said you would do this thing, that you would do good to me by me. And twice he says in this prayer, he's claiming that promise. And what he's saying is, you said that what I'm living through is going to fulfill your purpose. So whatever you think of it, there is a radical faith here, trusting that God is at work in his life, even though it's been a crazy life, right? And it's not been orthodox. He still believes that somehow this is occurring within the goodness of God. Interesting. Just on a point of application, part of what this says to me is that reconciliation, because that's the underlying theme here, right? Rematch or reconciliation. It is a fearful process. When we have to reconcile with someone where there are intense emotions, where people genuinely hurt us, when there's loss, when our hopes have been, all that pain, right? It's a very fearful thing to confront the person that you need to reconcile with. That's why most of us don't do it. We just run away. It's just too dang hard. Jacob didn't have to go back. I mean, but he felt compelled to go back, and he felt compelled to face his brother, even though his brother might murder him and his wife and his kids. It's a fearful thing. But Jacob is able to keep proceeding forward because of faith, because he believes that this is a God-governed process. He believes that God is with him. He believes that goodness will prevail. So again, I take this as a sign that there is genuine faith. Manipulators know when they're manipulating, right? Even if no one else does. And manipulators know you can't manipulate God. You know. And they wouldn't move forward, because if you know you're lying, I mean, I guess you could think that you're really an awesome liar, you know. But at some point your bluff is called, right? And so there's a tremendous courage here, and that he keeps moving forward. All right, verses 13 through 21. Let's hear these. Would somebody volunteer to read?
He spent the night there, and from what he had with him, he selected a gift for his brother Esau: 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He put them in the care of his servants, each herd by itself, and said to his servants, "Go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds." He instructed the one in the lead, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks, 'Who do you belong to, and where are you going, and who owns all of these animals in front of you?' then you are to say, 'They belong to your servant, Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us.'" How far did you want me to go?
To 21.
He also instructed the second, the third, and all the others who followed the herds, You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and be sure to say, your servant Jacob is coming behind us. For he thought, I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me. So Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp.
Okay, very good. I love your translation, by the way, pacifier, because I call this section the pacifier in my outline, or the appeaser, right? Okay, so once again, here's Jacob, and he's planning, right? And he's very intentional about this. And what does he do? He separates all this great offering that he wants to give to his brother, and he separates it into chunks. Right? And then he separates those chunks by some space, which space is time, right? And the whole plan is that all of this is supposed to, parade to Esau over time. And he outwardly states, what my goal for this is that I will appease him, right? I will assuage his anger. I will satisfy him. I will calm him. These are all kind of synonyms. Not synonyms. Synonyms. So again, what is Jacob up to? What is Jacob doing?
Calm the waters, get it prepared.
Okay, he wants to calm the waters. He wants to prepare before this meeting, not just rush into it. Okay?
Use the human way to open the door.
Okay? And in some cultures, this is still very much practiced today. You send gifts, you send emissaries, ambassadors. We Americans can often be so direct and confrontational in people's faces. If you have experience with other cultures, you know that many other cultures are much more indirect, right? And they work through intermediaries and other people and representatives. And so this is part of that ancient culture. What else do you think is going on here?
Trying to get himself to the next position relative to Esau where he can continue forward.
Okay.
Which is, he can get it kind of a spring back. He's relative to his position of spring back.
Yeah, so so again, back to my cynical generous side, okay? We could see this as, this is just some grand flamboyant display designed to impress. Right? He's just the marketing guy, and I'm a marketing guy, so I'm not criticizing you. He's just trying to impress. And so he's figured out, hey, if I stage it, boy, it has much bigger impact than if we just all rush in there together. That's cynical view. The generous view is, maybe he understands something about reconciliation. It takes incremental steps. It takes time. It takes multiple impressions. It takes one step forward and see if they move. And then another step forward and see if they move. And another step forward. Whatever it is, Jacob is very intentional here. Again, he is a serious man. He's not making this up as he goes. He's very prayerful, he's very thoughtful, and he wants this to happen. Yes, sir?
You've used 2 or 3 times now the phrase, a serious man.
Yeah.
Is there a background to that? The reason why I asked that question is I've heard that there's a movie.
There's a movie called The Serious Man.
And it made about it's
a Jewish guy.
A Jewish guy,
Yeah.
Jewish culture in
Yeah.
Minnesota, I think. But it made me wonder: is there some scriptural?
There's not.
Okay.
No. The scriptural is, for me, the scripture, why I keep saying that, is when I go back to Esau and the pot of beans story. Right? Esau he's so casual with the blessing. Oh, sure, I'll trade it for a pot of beans. Right? He's just so flippant. Like, who in the world treats the inheritance like this? I guarantee you no family of yours is going to be so flippant with who gets the inheritance.
Until it happened.
Yeah.
Until it happened.
I do
He
think-
took it much more seriously.
Yes, yeah. You're going to get serious later, but he was not a serious man. He just lived by the hunger of his gut, right? And so that's what I go back to. But you're right, that is kind of an homage to that movie.
Oh, okay. I just was.
For me, it is. I don't expect anyone to always. So you got it. So that's really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he's a Jewish man, a modern day Jewish man who keeps arguing. Look, I'm a serious man and I get nothing. Right? I lead a disciplined life. I'm honorable. I believe in morality. I work hard, and all these schmucks around me, they luck into everything, and they get blessed. and I don't get blessed. And so it's kind of like a modern day parable.
Yeah, well, that movie's a modern day retelling of Job. That's how
Yeah,
I
it's suffering,
Yeah.
right, yeah. So that's why I keep saying that, but
Yeah.
yes.
And I'm the PR lady, you're
Okay.
the marketing guy. And I say that what he's doing is he recognizes that it's all about relationship, and it's relationship for long term. So he also knows that there's a chance that when he sends the first thing, he's just throwing water on the oil. And the guy could get madder.
Yeah,
And so he has to show that this is real. Even if you kill this first group,
right,
this first guy, because he has him say, I'm coming on behalf of your servant, but he's coming next. He could kill this first guy,
yeah,
because it's like, I'm gonna take the goods and kill you and let the next one come. But eventually, you have to know that the greater good is that even if a few things go bad, hopefully after this many times, he's gonna see this is real.
that's a great way to
But
think
he's
about
also
it.
saying, but I realize too, when it gets to me, he could throw all he's got on me and I'm gonna have to take it
Yeah,
until he
yeah.
recognizes, I'm okay, I deserve all this, but in the long run, I really, really, really mean this.
Yeah, yeah. And as you were talking, what occurred to me is, imagine if at Christmas time, you have a family member that you're terribly conflicted with, and they send you an incredibly expensive gift. What's your first reaction?
What the heck?
Exactly.
What are they up to?
Trying to show me up, trying to show me how successful you are, trying to make me feel bad about myself, trying to one-up me, right? But if every month after Christmas, you keep getting a gift, you might begin to think, maybe this is serious. They really are sincere. I don't know. All right, I'm watching the clock. Let's very quickly, let's read this last passage, 22 to 32, in the final big struggle.
The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the
Jabbok.
Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Oh, and he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel,
Mm-hmm.
saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore this day the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the hip socket, because he struck Jacob on the hip socket at the thigh muscle.
Yeah, very good. So those last 2 verses are kind of this interesting aside about the dietary and the thigh muscle. We'll come back to that. All right, so here we have this fascinating story that en route to this potential conflict with his brother, this wrestling match with his brother, he first has to wrestle with God. What do you make of the man? That this man, he wrestles with this man. Every other account has been like an angel appeared or an angel said this or whatever. But this time, the human word man is used. Why do you think so?
So they'd be on more equal statures,
Okay.
to fight together.
Okay, so the mental image is more 2 men could wrestle, but how do you even imagine God wrestling with a human? And okay, very good. Any other reason why you think it might be described as a man?
This is angel quota was up.
Exhausted all of his angels. No more angels for
No
you.
more angels.
Yeah, yeah.
Doesn't this man kind of represent a particular way that humans could have gone, or a sect, or how do I describe it?
I think you're onto something.
He's not wrestling with man, but against a way of a life or something that had prevailed for a long time.
Okay. I think you're onto something. I think there's clearly multiple levels of conflict in this story, right? We have what's obvious by the story, Jacob struggling with God, right? We have what's obvious from the story, Jacob struggling with Esau, who is a man. We have Jacob's struggle within himself, right? With who he is, his own identity. And we actually have, to your point, Michael, Jacob's struggle with the broader cultural tradition and the way things have always been done. So in my last class, I described it as 3D chess. This is really 4D chess, if we can stretch our imagination. Right? So the man enables, as a symbol, enables us to see all of these levels of conflict in one symbol without reducing it to one thing. And I think that maybe that's why the story's told that way. But fundamentally, the story defines it as a struggle with God first and foremost. That's the pivotal thing here. Now, we don't have a lot of time, so let me just kind of make some observations and we'll kind of wrap this up. Jacob goes seeking a blessing, seeking confirmation of the blessing and reconciliation with his brother. What God gives him, though, is a new identity. What God says to him is, first and foremost, what you need is a radical way of redefining who you are and who I am for you. And so you have been known as Jacob, the deceiver, the supplanter, the heel snatcher. All of those words are in there. But that's not who you are. Who you are is Israel, which is understood to mean God provides, God protects, God preserves. Who are you fundamentally? You're not a deceiver. You're the one whom I protect and preserve and provide for. And not just for you, but through the world. Right? So it's a radical redefinition of who Jacob actually is. I call it the unmasking. Right? What God does, like in a wrestling match, they always want to pull off the mask to see the real identity. Jacob's real identity is revealed. The big aha is that he is the shining vehicle for the 12 tribes of Israel. It's just mind-blowing, right?
And I never noticed it before today's reading, but the act of him, he lost mobility during this, that even God's going to take care of you, even though he couldn't even run away from Esau anymore.
Yeah.
So he has to rely on God to protect him in this.
Absolutely. And in fact, yeah, that final that wound and all of that in wrestling with God, which he dared to do it, he was wounded and forever wounded. He was forever marked with the lamp as a witness, right? That he had wrestled with God and that he was forever dependent and reliant upon God. But God changes his name and gives him this new identity on the notion that he has contended with God. Back to my original thing. He is the wrestler. He is and that's the quality that will define Israel for all history. They dare to wrestle with God, and they dare in every difficult circumstances that history will throw at them to keep wrestling and to create content. And that's what's going to make them faithful bearers of the promise, because they're not passive. They don't lay down. They're not entitled, right? They fight and they contend. And I think that's fundamental to the story. So ultimately, this is a story of reconciliation. And actually, the verses outside of our text today, we're not going to get to 35. That's basically just an announcement of the 12 tribes. Is what happens when Esau shows up? Do you remember? Right after this, Esau shows up.
He's good.
What's that?
He's good. He's happy.
It's like the prodigal son. He runs to his brother. He throws his arms around him. They weep. I mean, it is this powerful, emotional reconciliation scene. God has been working in Esau's life all along. And every fear of Jacob actually evaporated because his brother, the wronged one, forgave him and embraced him because they knew that together. And ultimately they buried their father. At the end of it, the two brothers buried their father together in Hebron where Abraham is buried. So it's this powerful story of reconciliation, and I may have thrown you a few curves, but maybe it's something to think about.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Thank you for Michael Cox's help, and keep him safe while I'm trying to read the handwriting here, while he builds a workshop on the back of the house. All right. And then someone wrote again about the toppers, Jacob and Alyssa Topper, with their new baby on the way, baby girl due in June.
That's what she said on Facebook.
Right.
They're in Paris, by the way, France.
Okay, yes, I saw those pictures. Did anybody want to add any other prayer requests?
Well, mine was such a long story, I need 2 pages, but I'm just gonna take it.
All right.
Well, I long ago said that I had a house for sale in Oklahoma that I moved from and needed to sell the house. I'm not a 2-house person. And,
Most of us
but I
are.
do, right, so I have a contingency contract on it, which is wonderful, but the people need to sell some land that's sort of attached to their house that they have a contract on before they can buy my house. So see, that's a long story, but I'm praying that they sell their land so that so they'll buy my house. So it's, and it's a couple, I had both those kids in school. They were both my students.
Oh.
So it's kind of neat that, you know, and they're real strong Christian family with 2 little kids, so I'm real excited that they'll have the house. I think it's perfect for them, but anyway, I just still need that prayer because March will be 2 years. I really need to get rid of that.
Right.
I was gonna add, Henry, the newest victims in Broward County, and more than that, that this country can find a way to curb what's going on. I mean, it's sad. It's sad and it's almost insane. But 17 new victims of the same violence we've seen over and over and over again.
You never did tell us what that means.
Oh, so in Spanish, sin lucha no hay victoria, without struggle, there is no victory. And it's a popular expression in Spanish, and there's some variations on that too. But.
Well, if there are no other prayer requests or praises, we'll join together in prayer and we close. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this time that we have spent together studying Scripture. Thank you for Brad and his leadership of the discussion. Thank you for providing us the opportunity to struggle with you, and in so doing to grow in relationship with you and to understand what it means to be your children and to be your representatives. We lift up to you our praises and our prayers for the week. We offer thanks for the Topper family. Thank you for the blessings that you have bestowed upon them with the baby girl that they are expecting in June. Please be with them as they learn and accept their new responsibility and privilege of being parents. Thank you for our brother in Christ, Mike Cox. Help him as he begins a new project at home, building on his workshop on the back of his house. Please be with our sister in Christ, Vicki, as she continues her process and experience of selling her house in Oklahoma. Help her to and give her the patience and perspective that is required, and help her to come find a satisfactory conclusion. Lord, we offer our prayers, our thoughts, our emotions, our disappointment, our anger, all of the negative feelings that we are having with respect to what has happened recently with the school shooting in Broward County. We offer them up to you. We offer them up to you, hoping that we and our fellow citizens can then do something more than just offering prayers and thoughts to you, that we can find some solution, some resolution, something to address what appears to be an endless cycle of gun violence in this country. Help us to be able to have civil and focused dialogue